Here's the question. Are you in control of your congregation and your congregational assets? The ELCA has existed for nearly 40 years. It started as the merging of several Lutheran church bodies, and those church bodies came into the merger with differing policies, opinions, and perspectives. At the time of the merger, this was not only understood to be the case, but it was a valued part of the culture of the ELCA. Over the years, this culture has shifted. This shift is the center point of the mission and identity of the ELCA, as it has moved from one of congregational orientation to one of a corporate and institutional mindset. You might wonder why that matters. Well, it matters because of how this shift can impact your local congregation. It all boils down to this question: who's in control of your congregation and your congregation's assets? We're about to hear from several leaders from multiple churches throughout the country about their experience. Emmanuel Lutheran Church in Manhattan, New York, came to realize this cultural shift in the ELCA. And we have Pastor Laura Bassine here to share her story. Laura, thanks for joining us. Tell us a little bit about your congregation.
So Emmanuel, which is on the Upper East Side in Manhattan, New York, dates back to 1863. That was the founding of our congregation. And our beautiful historic building dates back to 1888. It's full of beautiful wooden carvings from Bavaria. We're a traditional congregation with a rich history, also a very German history. I know that at one time this was a German-speaking congregation. And, we have been a congregation who alive and active from the very beginning to this very day.
That's awesome. And nowadays, on average, how many people worship in your congregation?
So COVID changed things for a lot of churches. Active in the church on a Sunday, we average around 60. We used to average around 100 pre-COVID, but we do now have a live stream, and we have another 70 on live stream. So you could say we have about 130 active participants on a Sunday morning in both formats.
Tell us about your personal connection with the church. How did you join it and grow in your leadership there?
I was here at Emmanuel when we were negotiating leaving the ELCA. At that time, I had 2 young children, and I was not present for every meeting, but I was certainly involved and cared about the direction that we were going. And I do remember some of the concerns at the time. And I remember people saying that Emmanuel has its own constitution, and that this leadership at the time felt strongly that we could abide by our own constitution without fear from the ELCA. And when we did join the NALC, to my knowledge, there was a letter from the ELCA, protesting that and bringing it to the attention of the Attorney General of New York. But after that, from my understanding, we heard boo. We heard nothing. And it wasn't until 5 full years later. At this point, I was already a vicar at this church. I was already very involved in this church. And an attempt was made to sell the parsonage in order to save some money and move the pastors to one of the apartment buildings that we own, 2 apartment buildings that were gifted at the turn of the last century and are part of what makes this a valuable property. And out of the blue, the ELCA claimed that it owned that parsonage and that we weren't allowed to sell it. And very soon on the heels of that letter, we got a letter claiming that we were under synodical administration and were part of the ELCA. And it was very shocking because of the 5 years of silence. We tried to address it without upsetting the spiritual lives of our people. But it did eventually have to get out because we eventually had to start raising legal funds when we realized that the only way to fight this takeover, this proposed takeover, was through the courts. Under the encouragement of our lawyers, we were encouraged to present ourselves. We were invited to the Synod Assembly to say something. I think we had a time limit of 10 minutes or something very short, where we could talk about why we were not a congregation in need of synodical administration. And so we were led to believe that what we really needed to prove is that we were a living, active congregation. We've simply tried to be faithful to Scripture and the historic confessions, and that's why, in good conscience, we finally felt like we had to leave the ELCA. But when we got to that Synod Assembly, they seemed to want to attack us on ideological grounds, and it was so upsetting that I probably don't remember all the details, but I just remember looking at the face of senior pastor Gregory Fire, who's just utterly dismayed and was personally attacked, along with his wife, by name, at this huge assembly filled with people that had been his colleagues, led by a man who claimed to be his bishop.
Synodical administration has also been used against congregations in Texas. We had scheduled an interview with a few council members in a congregation in Texas that had experienced the synod's attempt to put them under synodical administration. They wanted their story told, but they ended up canceling their interviews out of fear of retribution from the synod. They were afraid that their pastor could face discipline or even being removed from the roster. And they didn't want to open themselves up to another attempt by the synod to put them under synodical administration. You might understand their reservations when you hear the story of a Lutheran congregation in Pensacola, Florida. They also felt the impact of this cultural shift. I'm here with Reverend Dr. Franklin Gore, pastor in Pensacola, Florida, who also has a story to share about his experience. We understand that the Florida-Bahamas Synod of the ELCA seized your congregation's assets by claiming to have the power to overrule a valid vote taken by your congregation. And they did this by using a constitutional provision that put the congregation under synodical administration. But before we get into the details about that and how everything happened, tell us a little bit about your congregation. How many folks currently worship with you, and where are you worshiping?
Right now, we have about 160 members in the congregation. We worship around 105 to 110 people per week, and we currently worship at Bredom Synagogue here in Pensacola, Florida.
So you're worshiping in that synagogue now because the synod claimed to have the rights to your property. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Well, tell me what happened. How did all of that take place?
Well, in 2019, our congregation was not happy with the direction the ELCA was heading, and so we followed the proper procedures of our constitution to disaffiliate or terminate our relationship with the ELCA. So we held the two congregational votes. We notified the synod. We did everything appropriately based on the Constitution. And the votes passed, or each meeting, the vote passed by supermajority. And so we were, going to disaffiliate or terminate our relationship with the ELCA. And it didn't happen the way that we thought it should have happened.
So in doing that, you followed the rules that were set forth by your own Constitution?
Yes.
So that should have been the end of the story, right?
That's what we thought. That's why I said at the last question, it wasn't happen. It didn't happen the way we thought it would have happened. The synod disagreed with how we were doing things, and they were even present during the vote. They claimed they had that we had to follow the ELCA's constitution, the Florida Bahamas Synod's constitution, that we never adopted. We hadn't changed our constitution since 2015. So they imposed hierarchical authority. They imposed their constitution on us. Then they went as far as saying that we had to ask permission because we LCA, which we seen that in the Constitution, but they had already told us if you vote to leave, we'll let you leave. So after two legal votes to leave the ELCA, we're still not able to leave the ELCA.
So the ELCA imposed their constitution onto you, even though your congregation had not ratified to be a part of it. So how did they go about doing that?
That is correct. The synod claimed hierarchical authority and ecclesiastical authority and overruled our constitution for the congregation, even though we never voted to receive their constitution. With this claim, we were moved from the court system back to the Florida Bahamas Synod Council for their ruling and their judgment over top of us, which of course they were going to rule that we couldn't leave and that we couldn't be part or terminate our relationship. Not only did we lose the building, we lost our endowments, we lost our savings, our checking account, we lost our preschool. We basically had to start from scratch with nothing. I mean, absolutely nothing.
So what do you estimate all of those assets were worth?
$2 million to $2.5 million.
Wow. And did you try to fight this? What were the tools available to you to try to work your way through it?
Well, yes, we tried to fight it, but unfortunately we didn't have the attorney at the beginning, so we ended up with a new attorney. We were going through the appeals process. The knowledge of that property law and the contract law was not with us. I mean, we just didn't have the know-how to do that. So we lost the court summary judgment based on that hierarchical authority, and we still had a lot of people on my council. They were suing my congregation council members for standing up against them. And so each one of them were being sued financially as well as myself. So we waived the appeal time because we didn't have the money. We're starting out from scratch. We didn't have the money anymore to keep supporting all that. And so we ended up going through the appeal process for just a little bit, and then we went to mediation so that our congregation council members could have some relief themselves.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story and your perspective. We're grateful for your courage and your transparency to share with others about what happened.
Well, thank you for letting us do that, because we need to get the word out to everybody of what happens when you challenge the ELCA.
We go now to Richard Schreiber in New York City to hear about his story at Emmanuel Lutheran Church. Richard, tell us a little bit about your role at Emmanuel Lutheran Church, and how many years have you been a member there?
Well, I've been a member, Tyler, since 1991, and my role right now is I'm on the Board of Trustees. We are the decision-making committee, if you will, that is involved with all major operational and financial matters aligned with the church. Been doing that for a number of years, and also have been volunteering at the church in other capacities pretty much since I've been a member.
So to be clear, you were simply trying to sell the property that your congregation has owned for over 5 decades. And in the process of trying to sell it, the Synod claimed they had to agree to you selling the property.
That's correct, Tyler. But it goes a little bit further and deeper than that. I don't think they were necessarily just trying to garner their approval for the sale. In fact, they were trying to take over the property from us, like we didn't have the rights to sell our own property. So we had a parsonage as well as some apartment buildings, although the initial lawsuit was surrounded the parsonage, which we decided to put on the market a few years back. And that's what triggered the initial lawsuit from the ELCA.
So Richard, what happened when you didn't follow the ELCA's claims over your congregational council and your property?
Well, there's a couple of things at play here. One is we left the ELCA in 2016 through a process that we followed, we thought, to the letter in leaving the ELCA, number one. Number two, the ELCA was formed, I believe, in 1988, which is an amalgamation of 3 separate synods within the Lutheran Church. And at that time, Emmanuel had its own constitution, which we understood prevailed irrespective of the ELCA's kind of inclusion of our church at that time. So we just assumed we had full authority to sell what was in the parsonage. And when the ELCA got wind of that, yes, they sued us to try to prevent the sale.
So where are things now? Are you still in a lawsuit with them? Has it been resolved at this point?
Yes, the lawsuit was essentially resolved. We had retained really extraordinary counsel that had a lot of experience in these kinds of matters. What the ELCA attempted to do is something called synodical administration, where they effectively attempt to take possession of a church congregation's property as well as autonomy over that congregation. But our counsel was able to, I guess, set the record straight and provide sufficient response to that initial lawsuit, such that eventually the ELCA decided to walk away from the lawsuit.
Talk to me a little bit about how much of a cost or toll this whole process has taken on you and the leadership of your church.
Yeah, it was a significant emotional and financial toll. The costs of the legal representation was well over $1.5 million to effectively untangle ourselves and get the lawsuit dismissed.
Well, Richard, thank you so much for your time today and for your courage to tell about your perspective and the story of your church. And we're praying that God would work through these circumstances for his glory.
Thank you very much for having me. And it's been a blessing that the outcome has happened. And I'm just so grateful to God that we are once again a healthy church body.
Across the country, many ELCA congregation members are unaware of the shift that's been happening in the structure and the governance of the ELCA. But when something happens in their congregation, such as the need to find a new pastor, they come to realize that a shift has happened, and things are not what they expected. And now we go to Donna Bolstead in South Dakota to hear more about her story. Donna, tell us a little bit about your congregation. Where are you located, and how long have you been a member? What's it like there?
Our church is a very small, rural, Midwestern church. Most of the people in our church have grown up there, or possibly married into the church, which is my situation. I've been there for 40 years now. It's a very tight-knit group, kind of a family feel. When we share the peace, it takes 5 minutes, and then you feel bad if you missed anyone. We're there to support each other in good times and bad times through all of it. It's just very much a church family.
So what happened to start to get your attention about the shift in the ELCA?
When our pastor announced that she was going to be leaving, it was pretty abrupt. And during our exit interview, in our conversation with her, she mentioned that we really needed to update our Constitution, and that if she had seen our Constitution before she accepted the call, she wouldn't have come. She said if we wanted to have success finding a new pastor, we would have to update our Constitution and change some of our ways of thinking.
So Donna, you then began to dig a little bit into the ELCA Constitution, and you started to do a lot of your own research. What were some of the things that you were learning and discovering about the state of things?
Well, I was looking into the Constitution. I was looking into some of the policies that they had, so social statements that they have adopted, some statements even made by the bishop herself, even the direction that they're going with the future Constitution and their plans for 2025. It did not have the feel of the institution that we joined. It was going in a new direction that we had not been aware of.
So Donna, what would you say to people now about what you had wished you had known about the ELCA back then?
I wish we had been more aware of the direction things were going, and I wish we had taken it more seriously. I think we had members that were very concerned, didn't want to make waves, thought we could just continue on the path that we had been on without really concerning ourselves so much with what else is going on. But we discovered that we really need to be educated. We need to know what they're doing, what's going on. We need to be able to protect ourselves. We need to be able to hold on to our beliefs and our values and not be swayed into the direction that they're moving things. Do your research. Make sure that your beliefs align with the direction that they're moving.
Donna, thank you for sharing your story. I know it takes a lot of courage, and we're just so grateful for your perspective on these things and your encouragement to other people.
You're very welcome.
Churches and church leaders would do well to heed Donna's advice, because the changes you're hearing about in this video might be just the tip of the iceberg. This cultural shift is sitting at the doorstep of every ELCA congregation. How so? In late July of 2025, the ELCA will hold its next church-wide assembly. One of the tasks of that assembly is to vote on constitutional amendments and to hear the results of a task force that's been working on a new constitution altogether. To learn more about these developments, visit the Lutheran Congregational Support Network website at www.lcsn.us and watch the next set of videos.